Hello and welcome back to episode 7 of the 1973 Datsun 240Z restoration. Two big things have actually happened since the last video. The first thing, which is also be part of this video, is that I've got the two initial jig supports for the car built, so it is sitting on the jig at the moment. I do still have to build out the remaining 3 jig sections, so that way it'll be fully supported at all the points I can effectively bolt this car into the jig and keep it all square so I can start cutting stuff out of it. That is one thing that happened. The second thing that happened is that I decided I'm basically gonna give myself 100 days to get this car running and driving again on the road. It may not be 100% completed. It may not have, may not have headlights, may not have something, little things here and there, but I do want to have it where it is running and driving once again in 100 days. So this is gonna be really hard. It's gonna be very busy, but it's gonna be a huge challenge. So, probably there's gonna be a couple days per video. So it's like, yesterday was actually, as I'm recording, yesterday was actually day 100. This is day 99. So, tomorrow will be day 98. But nonetheless, in this video, what I wanna do is kind of go through and build out the remainder of the jig. I already explained in the last video how I took my measurements, how I got that stuff sorted. And I welded out off camera. I welded out the 2 initial supports because what those are going to do, or what those are doing, is they set the plane for the car. They set the car level. It's sitting where it's going to sit. From here, I can actually just kind of build out the support up to the car, and I don't really have to fuss with picking the car up, putting it down, and everything like that in order to get it set on the jig, because that's a little bit tedious and doesn't really look great on camera. It's a little hard to record. So nonetheless, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get down here, get set up, take some measurements. I'm going to start with the trans cross member on this one and go about starting to get that one built out. So let's cut that. All right, so I'm going to show you the way that I've been taking my measurements from my crossbars on the car to the crossbars on the jig. It's a little hard to do one-handed, so you have to take my word for it that it's pretty accurate. But what I've been doing is I've been using a plumb bob and a clamp because I want to measure the distance, obviously, from there to there. So you have to kind of trust me that this is actually pretty close because the way I'm holding it, it's not the most accurate. But what it'll do is it'll give you the distance between there and there to a pretty close margin, and then I can go back in with a tape measure, get a good tape measure, not a cheap one, and honestly use the same one as much as possible. Don't go back and forth because there can be a little bit of difference between tape measures, and then I just confirm from there to there with the tape measure that it's fairly accurate. And from there, I will cut my section of steel with that chop saw out of my steel tubing and grind it to fit. Now, up here on the trans support, there is a little bit of wiggle, like maybe a 1/16 of an inch in vertical. But there is a shoulder up here that I'm hoping you can kind of see right there. This is actually resting on. So the bolts are not actually gonna be taking any of the load here. They're just there to help to keep this up in place and located. The trans mount itself will be what's taking all of the weight. So this will be pushed up into that point, and I'll cut my sections of steel, get them in place, get them as snug as I possibly can, because these ones I'm not picking the car up anymore to set them down on. So the closer and the tighter I can get it, the better. So I'm going to get those cut and I will grind them to fit as need be to make this a perfect fit, and that way it will be strong and sturdy. Okay, so I have my uprights pretty well set in place where they're gonna live. As you can tell, I have my level right there. It's almost perfectly level. I can do a little bit of adjustment before I actually go weld it on the car. But as you can see, it's tying into this right here. It's almost perfectly pushed up, flush with that little backing plate that is on trans support. Like I said, I might shim that just ever so slightly whenever I go to put the tack welds on it and then weld it out fully. You can see this side, it's got a little bit of a, it's not quite flush with it, but at the same time, it's not really gonna hurt too much as long as I get the tack in place in the right way. So what I'm gonna do now is make some last little adjustments and get these tacked in. All right, so I have the trans support all welded up. My welds still are not perfect, but they are getting better. So I will probably end up going back to this one, which was the first one I did, and probably cleaning up some of that work. However, I'm waiting on my drill over there to have its battery charged back up, but let me show you kind of what I've been doing in the meantime. So back here, I started getting ready to put together this point of the jig. Sorry for moving around a bunch. This one, which is going to, or supposed to tie in up here to the, like, I guess the forward lower control arm slash diff mount slash whatever you want to call it. But however, my floors are very rotten. So I know I'm gonna have to be doing work back in this area, which means I'm probably be pulling off the floor pan supports right here on both sides as well. Probably doing some work either around or with the seatbelt bolt bracket, whatever you want to call that. That's probably gonna have to, I don't know. I'll figure out what I have to do with that. Nonetheless, if I've installed, which I have it sitting right there, if I installed that up in here, getting back here to clean up, which granted I already kind of cleaned up a bit, but getting in back here to clean up would be a horrible, just not a lot of space to really deal with. And what I'm planning on doing is gonna be the last thing basically that goes on with this car, but I have full length frame rails. So instead of them stopping right here, they are going to extend back here and come up and tie in to this frame section right here. So it's gonna be a lot stiffer and a lot stronger. But for me to be able to do that, I need to have access back here. So realistically, these are the anti-roll bar mounts for the rear. This is how I believe late 240Zs, so like 73s, 260s, and 280s. I believe this is how they're all mounted versus the early 240s are mounted in the back. So if I do go to anti-roll bar at some point, I will probably end up doing the 240 style, having it back here, and I'm probably gonna get rid of these because these are just gonna be in the way of, you know, making progress with this. So those are probably gonna come off, even though I did plan on keeping them, but realistically, it's not gonna be prudent to doing so. Now, one thing I did also find is up here at the front, which I'm not excited about, but not surprised by. So while I was up here, moving on to building out the anti-roll bar for the front, the jig section for that, which is basically gonna be the quote-unquote last one I put together for right now. I was kind of inspecting my forward frame rail, and as you can see right there, we have a rust hole that has formed, and realistically, all of this, it's all pitted up and terrible, is probably also about to pop through from the back because this is a laminated section that reinforces where the anti-roll bar goes. So I was really hoping to salvage the front frame rails, partially because, you know, they locate the tension rod mounts. You know, it'd be nice to be able to keep those in place and not have to worry about misaligning those while I'm doing any work. And also, if I keep those in place, that would also help for me taking the radiator support out and being able to go ahead and kind of disassemble this, fix all the rust and all the seams, and restore this so that way it's nice and I can paint it and it's not gonna rust back out. But that is not the case, since this inner fender is by far a lot worse than the other side. My plan was to start with this side first, you know, kind of where people typically start with is in a battery tray, you know, going down into the floor pans, replacing the floor pans. Then they come up and they, you know, patch in, you know, how much frame rail they need. But I am ultimately going to be needing to go for the whole frame rail because I don't really want to section in, you know, right ahead of the, you know, where the engine mounts in. And then I'm still making a big assumption on how bad it might be, you know, on the other side of it, closer to the firewall. So unfortunately, I think I am probably going to be ordering a new frame rail section for this side. There's a good chance I'm also going to order one for that side, even though it does look to be in much better condition overall. But as you can probably see along the top there is some rust forming at the seams. So it's really hard to say what's behind there, or if in, you know, 2 years or whatever, it's not going to start bubbling up from where it is right there either on this side. So realistically, I'm probably going to be ordering those frame rails, which, you know, you can get those from KF Vintage. I've got most of the metal I've purchased for this car from KF Vintage. And as well, this is something else that I discovered. The door sills have had a kind of a rough go at life. This side at one point was pushed in. They drilled holes and pulled it back out and body worked it. That side was pushed in and they just painted over it. So initially I didn't really want to get into doing anything that has paint on it. I wanted to leave it all alone and just leave that for another stage of the restoration process. But since I have my frame rail supports that I want to weld in, or control, I don't know, whatever you want to call them, strut supports, they weld in back here and they tie in somewhere up about here. So obviously I'm not going to want to weld those into this. I've got some rust forming along this seam. I'm not going to want to weld that in here. And then whenever it comes time to actually fix the door sills, I'd have to cut those back out. And I don't want to do that because that's just going to be a horrible pain. I'm going to have to buy new supports because they're probably going to get mangled in the attempt to remove them. So I'm probably be ordering those as well as the forward frame rails. It's not what I wanted to do because it's very expensive. So I'm not super jazzed about that, but nonetheless, it needs to happen. I'm not going to be putting it together without that. So that's going to go on the list of things I need to get on order. They're very quick with shipping, but I really honestly wanted to wait, until I knew if I was going to need them or not. And I found out sooner than I was expecting that I'm definitely going to need this side. So realistically, I'm probably going to also go for that side too. So things I'm probably also going to do is probably going to involve building possibly from off of the trans support back there to the tension rod mounts, something to hold that in place, locate that against the jig so that way it doesn't move or anything. And whenever I go to cut that out, I will have a flat surface that's located for that so that I can put it right back up to there, butt it up against there, and then weld that to the new frame rail. So that is pretty well what the plan is for that up here. Now, I do think I'm done rambling about that for a little bit. So what I'm going to do now is grab the drill and start drilling out the bracket that I made for the anti-roll bar support so I can get that bolted in, cut its risers, and then weld that in, and then the jig is going to be done for now. All right, so I have the last of the brackets I'm going to be putting together for the moment. This one ties into where the anti-roll bar goes, and it is, here in place and it's doing its job. So from here, what I've been working on is I actually got out the passenger side floor patch that was put in back in the day. And you can really kind of start to see the extent of the rust that I've got going on in my floors here. Now, I do actually have this whole floor pan for both sides actually from KF Vintage I'll be putting in. I don't know 100% for sure yet if I want to take out the seat brackets. I'll probably have to take the rear ones out, probably no way around that, but at least possibly leaving in the forward bracket just so that way it can kind of hold the tunnel and the door sill together, and it'll keep that located properly so that way I can have that in place. I can set the floor pans, make sure they're in the correct at the correct height, and then I can probably grab the seat from inside, set it down there, and make sure that my rear seat studs, whatever you want to call them, are set in the right place. I'm not fully committed to any idea yet as far as if I will do that or if I'll just cut all this out, but nonetheless, the floors obviously need addressing. All right, so what I decided to do is actually to use some self-tapping screws through the flanges of the seat rail, so that way they're located in the trans tunnel as well as on the inner door sill over here. That way I can go ahead and I can take out the, all the floor pan, I can take the seat rails out, and then I can actually screw them back in so that way they're located. They won't actually be doing much structurally to hold the car together, but they will let me put the new floor pan in and fit it up best to where this was originally. So that's the way I'm going to do this. It'll be the most precise way to do it that I can think of with the least amount of extra work. I could measure out every single little thing, but honestly, I don't think it's going to do me any more good than just self-tappering them in. And I mean, the hole's not going to move around, so it might honestly be the best possible option. Rear seat ones might do the same thing. It just depends on where I can run them through. I don't think I really have a space where I can run a screw into the trans tunnel since this isn't coming out. I think it just goes down to the floors, but like I mentioned, the seat will locate where it should be back here. So as long as that front one is in the correct position, it should be fine. So that's the way that I'm gonna handle this. And yeah, because honestly, the floors are the first thing that need to go back into the car, because I think from the factory, that's probably one of the first things that the car got built off of. So yeah, so that's the first thing to go in, and then from there, you know, we're just working our way through everything that needs replacing, and eventually we'll have a Datsun 240Z again.